Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our weekly live stream. Thank you for joining us. If you're a returning viewer, if you're new to the series, welcome. This is an interview that we do every single week, as well as a live stream performance. And on the first Sunday of each month, it's a hybrid performance here at McMiniman's Elks Temple in Tacoma at the Spanish Ballroom. And today we have a very special treat because we've got the wonderful trumpeter and flugelhornist and composer, Mr. Oliver Groenewald.
That's wonderful.
Groenewald.
Yeah. Groenewald.
Welcome and thank you for coming today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's beautiful here.
Yeah. For those of you who haven't been here, it's a beautiful room. In fact, there's a tour going on right now in the background there. They're showing them all the paintings and stuff. But it's a lovely venue to perform in and do these things, and we're happy to be here. And Oliver, you traveled all the way down from Orcas Island. Is that correct?
Yes, this morning.
Okay.
I got up at 6 and the ferries were on time. It went smooth.
Yes. Well, now, how long have you lived on Orcas?
It's about 10 years.
All right. And so you're originally from Germany, correct?
Correct.
All
yeah.
right. Whereabouts did you grow up in Germany?
Well, I grew up actually in a very rural area, with farms and cows and so forth. And there was not much jazz, of course, no affiliation. And my parents were very open to music and very supportive, and there were a lot of instruments around. My father used to play violin and trumpet and trombone, and my mom played piano, cello, and so forth. So that was my family was my cultural home. There was not much city or something I could pick off, So, and it is located in northern Germany. It's actually between Bielefeld and Hanover. Yeah, maybe some people recognize that.
Well, my wife's family, my mother-in-law's from Berlin, and she's one of 8 brothers and sisters, and many of them, they grew up in the church, and it was very prevalent that a lot of them played brass instruments and a little piano and things. So I'm wondering, were they involved with any music in a church, or?
No, yes, also. Every church has something which we call Posaunenchor, a brass choir. And actually, years later, in 2000, I got commissioned to write a book, jazz arrangements for exactly those people. And yes, I was also involved for a short time playing in church before, I went on to play jazz and big bands.
Well, so you said your parents are very open to lots of different broad styles of music. Did they listen to jazz? I mean, how did you get started listening and interested in playing jazz?
That's a major question in my case. The thing is, my parents were absolutely actually into classic music. There were string quartets on Sunday morning in our living room, and my father and my mom had friends playing string instruments, and everything was set to classic music. And somehow, due to the fact that my father also played trombone, none of that happened professionally. My mom wanted to be, was on the way to grab a career, but at that time, that was in the 40s, there were other things, And so I think one of the first things I got in my hands was a record with Glenn Miller. And that was the first touch. So it was like big band music. And big band was also my first contact. We had like a school big band, of course, and the repertoire was Count Basie, then something, I don't know how popular it was in this country, but very popular in Germany was James Last and repertoire like this.
I've had over the years. This year will be my 20th year teaching as an artist in residence at the Tacoma School of the Arts doing their jazz program. And over the years we've had, they have a very strong exchange program, and I've had multiple students come over from Germany and asking them about music school and their education in Germany. It's very strong from what I understand in terms of how they study music and learn music. Was that the same in your experience?
Yes. It was. Then you know that we have a music program at school and also after school, which is called Musikschule, however you translate that. And that was also the first big band and the first real trumpet lesson I got there. And actually I also learned to play drums. That was before I actually played trumpet in a big band. There was a little time playing drums. And that was very, very important for me to learn there. You know.
Well, you look fairly young. I'm not going to assume your age. How old are you?
Young.
All right, fair enough.
I'm 54.
Okay. So when you were growing up, you started with big band. Were in the town where you were learning how to play, were there any clubs or places where you could speak, where you could learn and watch people? I know that there were a lot of expats, like U.S. musicians that went over to Europe and lived and stayed. You know, Dexter Gordon being a saxophonist, you know, he's one of my heroes. He was over there for a long time. Did you ever get a chance to see any of these folks perform, or were there any clubs you could go watch people play?
Not at this time, no. That was actually I started out to study classic music. I was accepted as a young student at the age of 16 to study at the Hochschule in Detmold. That was then, 84, 85? And the advantage of all of this, being so young, invited to study, and also, you know, at this time you could get like little jobs subbing, doing stage music and opera and so forth, and that was gold for me because I could see actually where I would end when I studied classical trumpet. And so I was fairly young. If I would have like really, you know, powered through, I probably would have gotten some sort of job in the mid-20s, so that would mean another 40 years doing this job. And I have a high respect for orchestra musicians. I mean, Germany has still about I think 130 government or city supported classical orchestras. You know, there is a scene, but not for me. You know, I had like, when I was young, I remember what kind of stage music I did like about 30 times in a row. And yeah, wonderful, you know, you go and this quality to have had the chance to experience this and make a decision up on that was very important. So I was there, and of course everyone tried to play, you know, improvise and you know, jazz. And at this time our professor was like strictly against that. You know, it's like, you know, you just ruin your chops, and you know, you have to play strong straight notes and, you know, pianissimo. And well, we didn't. You know, we tried. You know, and so here's the thing. One person, Georg, helped me like really preparing and getting an insight. You know, there is the situation where you have a lot of people, they play sort of jazz, they know sort of jazz, but I decided that I want to really learn more about it. And also, we're talking about the 80s. If you sign up for, which I was, for a trumpet performance in the classical area, you learn a lot about trumpet. You learn a lot about orchestral excerpts. You learn a lot about so you can play in an orchestra and function, but not so much about how all this comes together. And of course, you could study orchestration. You could study, and some, you know, classes we would share with all, you know, composers and so forth. But I think I was not ready to receive that message. And jazz, actually, before I fell in love with, Louis Armstrong or Freddie Hubbard, I remember Hoptones. I wear this record out, But, it was, for me, the attraction was that I was aware that jazz musicians had a lot more knowledge about music, improvisation, theory, and all this back then was catered to classical trumpet students. And so it was also, after not too long, I think it was 18 when I then started to be interested to really apply to study jazz trumpet. And I remember back then, Hilversum, Cologne, and Graz. Those three I put my papers in. And I think Cologne I missed by date, and Graz was next. And I went there as was back then, I was 18, and the between where I live and Graz is like this, and from here to here is Germany, and this is Austria. I had no idea what I'm dealing with. So I said, good. I had, back then we did Kreidekreis von Brecht at the Detmolder Landestheater. So I thought, I do this gig, then I hop in my car and go to Austria because I have the next morning at 11 ear training exam. So, which I did. So what I did not realize that from all this way, this is me, this is Austrian border, this is Graz, that this little thing takes exactly the same like all the way to the border. I was dead like a cat and did my ear training, and it all went well. And so I ended up studying in Graz jazz, which was a very, very good decision. Yeah, this is how I came to jazz, actually, by being interested more into know more about music, be able to compose and that.
Well, it's interesting. A couple of things. One, I wanted to ask you first, prior to that point, like you mentioned Glenn Miller and a couple other big bands, after that initial entry point into getting an interest to jazz, did you start, when did more like solo, like trumpet players or other musicians come into your sphere of influence? Or was it all big band up until that point?
I think it was this Freddie Hubbard album. That was Freddie Hubbard is still, it's this soul and the artistry, but more of the soul. It's like there are a lot of people can play technically, but now Freddie Hubbard, I can't remember who gave this album to me, but that was it. And one thing comes to another, and you back then there was no Google, there was no YouTube, and you hang out with friends, and then a guy like this put like Miles Davis. Unfortunately, one of the first records I got in my hand was Star People, and I was not ready for that yet. If Miles 58 or so would have been there, or Kind of Blue, that. But it works. It worked.
I remember the first time I heard John Coltrane, it was like a late John Coltrane. And up until that point, I had like everything Charlie Parker, cassettes, right? All the Charlie Parker cassettes. And I was like, man, I hate John Coltrane. And it was just, number one is my own ignorance because I didn't know about all the earlier stuff that he did. Like I started with early Coltrane, like when he was with Miles, then I'd be, oh, this is great. But it's just funny how that works. And so I think a lot of times when musicians ask, well, where do I start? It's like, well, when you look at someone like Miles Davis, you need to understand like the body of work that he's done spans, 40, 50 years. There's a lot of things there. So where do you start? It just depends on what you like, I guess. But what I wanted to ask you too is, growing up in Europe with a strong classical foundation, a lot of musicians in the United States will always, praise, studying classical technique to give you the tools that you need to be able to improvise and spontaneously compose music. So, I think that could be a blessing in disguise, I guess, if you had to have that strong classical foundation. Would you agree or disagree?
I agree, but as aforementioned, the track I was in was like, sort of back then a conditioning track. It changed by far. The education, the classical education, changed by far and to the better. It was back then. It was really like the audition. You have to play Haydn concerto. You have to play maybe a Tunian. You have to play Zarathustra, Lohengrin. All those things, and down to perfection. There you go. I mean, that takes long enough too. So to go out and learn. That was not the case unless you play piano or organ. I mean, improvisation in itself is a very old tradition, as you know. So what the difference is in this is the language. The material to improvise with. The condition with drums and bass eventually.
Wonderful. Well, I wanted to ask you, prior to ending up in college and beginning to study jazz, did you have any private instructors outside of like the classical sphere? Or was it all just your friends that you were playing jazz with that had a similar interest?
Well, the group was very small. And it was, again, like big band, and then, you have like a 16-measure solo, and you try to do the best of it. And, well, there was really one person, who was Georg Rox in Detmold, who sort of really took me under his wings. And I remember he prepared me for my audition in Graz, and Whisper Not is a tune will stick to my personal historical wall of progress. So that was it pretty much. Trumpet as an instrument which was also in schools was needed, and Graz was and still is a big jazz department. It's actually, I think, the oldest in Europe. They started somewhere in '65 as a conservatorium, and they had already they had 2 big bands at least, and there was a need for trumpet players. I was sure not, when I was auditioning, a knockout soloist, sure not, but I think I convinced with some sort of musical quality, and so I got this position, the place. And I was not, I got a little cold feet. I got, my father really supported me a lot with my my whole family. But, I had his credit card and could do things. He was a banker, and when I turned, I had to cheat a little in this version that when I left Detmold to go to Graz to study jazz, it was also required to study classic the first 3 years. So when I told my dad I also, I study classic in Austria, he was okay. He was not aware that's actually a jazz study. And so I remember that was the first or second semester. We always had at the end of a semester a presentation, was videotaped. So it was before Christmas, and I came home with a VHS, and I thought I'd give my dad a little taste, and put the tape right on the spot where I would play, and I put it in, and he saw me, and I played, and I can't remember what kind of song, and well, after 2 minutes he said, well, it's time for the news. And I still had his credit card, but not anymore his understanding. And the music, it's not that he didn't like jazz. He was just scared that I will have a hard life to survive as a jazz musician. So, how did we get to this point?
No, I was just asking about if you had any trumpet teachers prior to going to college. No, this is good. This is all good stuff. Don't worry about it. This is fine. I was speaking of jazz musicians having a hard life. I mean, that's kind of true in everywhere you go in the world, but unfortunately right now, not always the case, but right now, it seems to me, I'll be 43 next week, but in my lifetime, it seems to me that the economics of the music business, it's almost like a pendulum. It's really, really great, and then it kind of goes the other way, and it's not so great, but We'll see. We'll see how things end up. But I wanted to ask you, some of my friends that are musicians in France were talking to me about they have remittance, where basically the arts is subsidized by the government. So if they go to a venue and perform, and the venue doesn't have enough money to cover the cost of the musicians or the band, then the government will subsidize that. Is there something similar to that in Germany, or is that a different thing?
No, that's in Germany too. The amount varies, and it could be always more. Fact is that Germany does a lot. I mean, as Eva mentioned, the classical orchestra, operas, and so forth. That gets a lot of support. Jazz. Well, jazz is historically not really from Germany. Our history is, Beethoven, and Brahms, and yeah, that's a fact. And jazz is also not the daily language, the daily music. I mean, at least at the time I got started, jazz was special, and it's good, but it's also, whenever you have your horn in your hand and play jazz, it is special. It's a festival, or I can't think of any club I was close to having jazz performances on daily basis, or so. Like when I came here to Seattle, Tulas, that was like every day, and Sunday and Saturday 2 shows. I maybe in Hamburg or Berlin or some club, but not near me. But there is support. You have to fight for it. But
I've thought about this, just talking about, and I'm in no way bashing this country, but it's a very young country in comparison to several other countries around the world. And you go to Asia, you go to Europe or other places, and it seems to be that there's a lot more support for the arts. There's a stronger support and history of support for the arts, and it seems in audiences, when I've played in audiences in these other countries, that there's more of an appreciation for it. Maybe that's because it's been more ingrained in culture over centuries. What are your thoughts on that coming from another country?
Yeah, appreciation. I feel appreciated here too. It is interesting. They're on my way up here, or actually, since I know that we have a chance to talk about it, I was thinking, how Kareem, what would he ask? And so it's obvious that there at some point, to compare Europe and America, or Germany and America. The first time I came here, this is where actually my story here started. It was 94. When I started studying with Chuck Israels at Western. And that was 2 years, and then I went back to Germany, and I got my jobs, not immediately, but, I started teaching, and then now I'm back here. So I spent a fair amount of time in this country, and also in Europe. I studied in the Netherlands too. It's still, for me, not easy to compare in terms of what's better or not. It's just different, and you have to react different. And
I don't mean to say better. It is that's the term that we should use. It is different. I mean, it's from a different lens. And I'm wondering, I guess the question is, audiences here are great, and they are appreciative, but I feel like, and from my perspective, when I've gone to other countries and performed, there's been a different level of appreciation towards what we're doing versus here. And it's not better or worse, it's just different. And I'm wondering, and that's why I'm hoping maybe you can speak to that growing up in that environment, because art and history of art appreciation has been, several hundred years in the making over there versus here, a different level of, it's a mix of all these different things.
Well, this is probably something you can say better than me, because it as you mentioned, growing up, history has to do something with growing up. It is. I think for a lot of people in this country, Germany starts and ends somewhere around 40, and they miss out on a lot. There's. Germany is about 2,000 years, and doesn't matter if it was what kind of form of government or state or whatever. It's the soil and it's the culture, you know. And who is it? Hildegard von Bingen, you know, 10,095, you know. This is when she wrote. When she composed, she was also a scientist. And, you know, if you start like this, you know, then the next 1,000 years, then there are some names are more familiar. Then we have Bach, and then we have Beethoven, then we have Wagner.
Who also improvised. A lot of people think, oh, well, it's just a written thing on the page and it has to be played the same way every time, but they improvised on their themes, correct?
Absolutely, but you know, there's the thing. This is a very valid question or thought. You know, I like sometimes I think questions to turn this in thoughts and thought process. You know, so well, yeah, you know, how does composition turn into a composition after being improvised or tried, or you know, we know that historians are reporting about Mozart, that he was like in one stroke from top left to bottom right, you know, it's good. We know Bruckner, who rewrote a lot of his symphonies many times, version X, version this, version after. You know, what you call this moment until you're real. And I actually, years ago, you know, we do a lot of train riding, which I actually miss. You always sit with a nice constellation sometimes of people together. So I was sitting with an engineer, and we were sitting in this train, and we almost got really hot on each other about the terminology improvisation. How much does an engineer improvise until he gets it right? Is this improvisation or is this surge, you know? And so is improvising a surge? You know, that's a thought. And the thing is, yes, Bach, you can't, it's actually mandatory for church musicians at school. It happened that after I left Detmold to study jazz, I came back later and taught almost 20 years there. I did the jazz department, sort of jazz module, and so I had the chance to work with almost every student. Not with every student from the school, but out of every direction. And the church organ players, there was mandatory that they improvise. So here's the thing. The improvisation is like not coming from thin air. It's about a theme. It's about you warm up the community before the next chorale comes. And that's improvised. You know, little cadence, little melody, little hint, and then a good note to give the community a good start. So, yeah, it's not written, so let's call this improvisation. But as aforementioned, in the wider spectrum of discovering classical music, there's so much. I mean, you know, maybe one day, or you had already a jazz piano player who maybe studied classical piano before. I don't know through what they go. I mean, there's like tons of repertoire which is written and which has taken a lifetime to be able to play. And so where's the space for improvisation, and then how much can it help to achieve the goal to play the Tchaikovsky piano concerto? So, yeah, it's a thought.
Well, I want to get, there's always like not enough time, there's so many questions, but I want to go back to your schooling. So when you go to Graz, you're starting to study jazz. So when you're there, were there venues where you could go and play and try things out with your peers and go see other artists and things of that nature? Or?
Graz in the 80s, that was heaven. That was like a party. That was amazing. There was like, people from New York said there's happening more than in New York. There were there were evenings. There was Maynard Ferguson. Woody Shaw was there very often because I think he had a booker from Switzerland, a bass player, and an Austrian drummer, Alex Deutsch. And I was just very young, and on the way of orientation to see, oh, it's jazz. Is that the jazz I like? What is jazz? It's like there's an interesting moment with my teacher. He said, yeah, okay, jazz. Take this solos, Clifford Brown, and learn this by heart and play this. And I'm a pretty open guy, and I said, well, so I come from a school where they trained me to play Haydn like Haydn and Bach like Bach and Bruckner like Bruckner and all this, and now I want to study jazz, and you tell me I should do this and sound like Clifford Brown. And is that the jazz? And you have to understand also, like the 80s, obviously coming right after the 70s. And there was...
It's a strange time for jazz.
Yeah, it was like, there was a lot of free and open and, and other things. And, I remember, in Germany was a front runner was Albert Mangelsdorff. You ever heard that name, the trombone player? Oh, dig this. He was around, he did a lot of good things, but it was not bebop, And so it's like the experience of like, how to discover this music called jazz, which was already in the 80s like so broad, so many things. And there were people, they had it all mapped out, bebop is my stick, they transcribed this, they did this, they sounded like this. Good. And well, I highly respected this and enjoyed it, but I could not hear me directly in that music. No. So I went with knowledge and tried to compose my own songs, and I actually pretty early on got a new net, a 9-piece band, my first 9-piece band, and it turned out through all this that I have a huge affinity for Gil Evans and Thad Jones and aforementioned Freddie Hubbard and Kenny Wheeler, a lot of Kenny Wheeler. But I can't play trumpet like Kenny Wheeler, and unfortunately you need a lot of trumpet skills to really follow his lines. He was one of those masters who had like at least 3 octaves on hand at any time. And yeah, so that was the search.
Well, so then, okay, so how did you get from there to wanting to come to Western to be with Chuck Israels and stay with him? How did you know about Chuck, and how did that come about?
That was another advantage of the school in Graz. The jazz department had organized a lot of workshops. Mel Lewis was there. Hal Galper was there. Art Farmer brought in Wynton Marsalis one day. And so one day Chuck Israels was there. And that was the time I mentioned my first new net. And we recorded this. That was, I think, 89. And it was about the time where the jazz department was looking, had different voice teachers. Jay Clayton was there, and Andy Bay, Sheila Jordan, and also Mark Murphy. And Mark Murphy heard this band, and we got together, and I had the great chance to arrange an album for him called Very Early. And I told him, this is I'm on the starting process of all this. He said, no, you do this, Still very thankful for this chance. And so now I'm lost again. Where was the question?
I was asking how you got from Graz over to study with Chuck, but you met Chuck in Europe.
Yeah, and so that was the time when Chuck came, and he heard this, and he said, well, would you be interested to come and study with me in Bellingham? I said, yes. And so we started the process while I was still in Austria. Between Austria and Bellingham, I studied with a wonderful player who's not known much here, not as much as he maybe should. I mean, this is in general, I think there are a lot of European jazz musicians. I mentioned the names and no one ever heard from them. I think there is a different level of openness between, the European jazz scene and the American jazz scene, maybe. Yeah, sometimes I wonder. And his name is Ak van Rooyen, and he's a wonderful musician, plays flugelhorn, and he's, I think, 91 now, and he just recorded another album. It's wonderful. And after this, it takes so long to take all the paperwork together. Back then, I had to do TOEFL tests, and this is test of spoken and written English, and I remember that was 6 in the morning, somewhere close to Amsterdam, and things. And so it worked out. So I finished Graz, then Den Haag, and then I flew over here to Bellingham, where I then met Willie Thomas,
Well, I wanted to get to that, but this is an interview about you. So
Okay.
that's a whole nother interview, and we're already getting close to being out of time. So we're going to touch on that briefly, but we'll get to that. So we're at that point in the interview where if any of the viewers have questions for Oliver or myself, please go ahead and put them in the comments. I should have mentioned this earlier, but yeah, please, if you have questions, let us know, and we'll do our best to deal with those. Are there any questions, comments yet? No? Not yet. Okay, so if you have any, let us know. In the meantime, I'm going to keep barraging Oliver with questions here about his sordid past. Well, can we talk about a little bit about Willie Thomas, who was your father-in-law at one point? But yeah, for those, many people know of him and his legacy, but can you talk a little bit about him?
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's start how we met. We met me being in underwear because... So maybe a little earlier than that. So Chuck, finally we had all the papers together, and he said, well, Ollie, you can come. And where do you like to live? And, there are dorms and so forth. And there is a friend of mine just moved up here, is Willie Thomas. And he also worked some in Germany. I was not aware of his name at this time. And how about sharing the house with him? He wants someone, he needs someone to share the house with. And I said, okay, let's do this. And there was one thing, it's like no smoking and no drinking. And that was the absolute opposite of everything before. And so my last party, so the interview is about me, right? So the last party I had was from Amsterdam Schiphol to Minneapolis. Back then the international flights were still allowed smoking and drinking, so I had to go on that. And I was also wearing all my leather clothes because they're so heavy. I did not want to put this in my luggage. So I landed in Minneapolis, and that was the end of all of the above. And but I was still like smelling like I was living in a club. So when Chuck dropped me off at Willie's house, I came through the garage and through the little room where the laundry stuff is, and then the living room. And he said, "Where's my German?" And he saw me, and he probably smelled me first, and he said, "No." So I got back in the garage and I had to take all clothes off and boxer shorts, and it was great. Willie Thomas is actually predominantly for me was the key to education. I was so passionate about helping people to learn to play jazz. That was really fascinating. There is something about jazz which has like some myth, some said a word. You know, it's like, you know, you don't want to really know how it is to keep it. You know, it's like, how is the solo structured, or why is so good, or you know, and all this, and you know, you might know, like in Europe, with all this history, you know, they let you run through all scales, and then, you know, that would be a G7, and this is an avoid note, and this is all this, and map it all out, and really a total different approach. Said, like, let's do it like we actually did back then. And his version is like with words, with rhetoric, with, you know, language. And he found this thing for himself, pentatonic pairs, you know, which is like, doesn't really work. Pentatonic is 5 and pairs is 4, but here's the thing, it's 4 notes sounding like pentatonic. And so it's way easier, as we know, to put a 4 note phrase into our 4/4/8/8, you know, system. And so with not a lot, and with rhythm and a melodic taste, you can pretty much get people pretty quick started to speak, you know, opposed to having like a Mixolydian scale on hand. Okay, here you go. You know, and just this little thing is so good. And his website, I'm honored to have his legacy under my responsibility, and I keep it up. The website, jazzeveryone.com. And you will hop on the train. It has free memberships, if I may say so, and you can look around. It has 600 videos, and he was, if I could share in our interview how passionate he was about creating those videos in his cabin with not more than an iMac camera. This is like the quality, you know, it's not like 4K and super with, you know, fade in, fade out. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning. Oh, Charlie Park, yeah, you know, this thing we need. iMac on, he in pajama, let's do this, and call and response. And you find all those videos on this website. And last year, unfortunately, you know, with what we all had to deal with, online was the thing to do, and the website got really a lot of new followers and new members, despite the fact there is also so much online for free, which sometimes makes it a little different to you know, diversify. What is jazz? You know, you see a lot of guitar and keyboard, and you do Mixolydian and so forth. And I sometimes find it difficult then to find orientation. Where's the value in all of that? And with Willie Thomas, you can be pretty sure that this has like an arm and a leg, you know.
Well, and for those that, like I said, that are not aware, I see we got a question.
Oh, there's a question.
For those of you that are not aware of Willie Thomas, he's a tremendous musician and educator. So I was not aware about this, about the website, but I'm going to check it out. And yeah, so I'm going to, but I strongly encourage everybody to check this out, because he's been doing it for a long time, and he's definitely a master. So question, what do we got?
That's Dan Marcus.
So the question, he wants to know about Dinah Washington and Nina Simone, and what was the other one? Shirley Bassey.
You know, Wendy, hi my love, is so the fact is that we have a little farm on Orcas, and the first 3 goats we started, we named after singers. And Dan Marcus was so kind. Some years ago, he built a swing for Dinah. Yeah, it's a swing set. Yeah, you know, swing for goats. Yeah. Dan is a good friend. Dan also helped me with my new net. You find this on YouTube. Is the new net live at the chapel. You know, this is the band Jay helped me putting together. In 2015, he organized something with Shoreline Community College, and we did this. Yeah, Dan, love you.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for watching. Any other questions? So the question is, why did you decide to settle in the United States?
Well, I had 2 wonderful positions in Germany, and I really missed my work and loved my work before I missed it. But it is my wife brought me here, and I have to say I liked it before, but I had no real reason to stay. I did my master in '96, and actually that was the end of 10 years being on the road, and at one point I liked to be like sort of home, and now I'm here and this is my home and I feel great.
After 2020, do you have that same feeling about being home?
What do you mean by 2020?
That was a terrible joke. I'm talking about being sequestered in your house because of the pandemic. But everyone says,
well,
so much time at home.
we're we're blessed. I mean, Orcas Island is a special place. I mean, we had our own little assignments to go through, but I mean, come on, it's an island in the Pacific Northwest. It's good. Good life. Thankful.
Fair enough. Well, we're getting close to being out of time here, and there's millions of other things I'd like to ask. There's more questions. All right, good.
I love
questions.
it.
What do we got?
Questions.
Is there a difference of feel for a European audience versus a United States audience?
So the question is there a different feel between a European audience versus a United States audience? And I'm assuming this is in regards to like a jazz audience or a jazz performance, and I'll let you address that.
I would say knowing the performance, playing jazz. Jazz is an art form here, which is also utilized, or not utilized is a wrong word, enjoyed as an entertainment. And in Europe, you can eventually hit an audience which is starting to dissect you and like, oh, what he's doing exactly there, and what, more than like just, oh, it's nice, Can you share that?
Yeah, no, I would say the same thing, and I think it has something to do with, and I'm not saying one's better or worse at all. It is different, and I think it has to do with countries that are, there's a story one of my friends told me a long time ago that her mother owned an antique store here in the United States, and she had visited India and visited an antique store in India and was talking to the shopkeep about, oh, I like your store, and the owner was like, what do you do? And, oh, I run an antique store in the United States. And the owner kind of laughed and said, well, for something to be considered an antique in India, it had to be 500 years old. Well, there's a little bit of a difference in terms of the span of time. So I think in these other cultures that have had, people that have enjoyed art for hundreds and hundreds of years, there's a different level of understanding and appreciation than what we have here. And again, I'm not denigrating our audiences here. It's just, it's a different thing. And you can see it when you perform for jazz audiences in other countries, I feel, in my limited experience. So, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Other questions? So the question is, how has Oliver integrated himself into the Seattle scene over his time being here in Washington?
Well, to rephrase it a little, how was I integrated? And this is just wonderful. I mean, to integrate myself into the Seattle jazz scene is a little hard for me since I'm on Orcas. All the things were important to show up on jam sessions and all this. I can't really be the spontaneous, so, but I felt very, very welcomed. With my new net, and Jay Thomas actually is an important name. I mean, the last time before I came back, I saw him was on my recital at Weston. He played on my recital, and he helped me then, and Dan Marcus to put my new net together. And whenever, it's beautiful. Yeah, I wished for that reason I would be a little closer. It's a wonderful scene. In fact, I had once an interview in Germany when I left, and they asked me, "So, Oliver, why are you leaving, and where are you going?" And I talked about Seattle and all this, and I was not expecting. But the headline of this article was "Seattle loves jazz." Seattle liebt jazz. Yeah, it's wonderful. Was this answer enough?
Yeah, we're getting short on time here. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do another one of these because we inevitably always run out of time, and there's a million more questions left unanswered.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, but Oliver, thank you for being our guest today. For our viewers, thank you for joining us. And if we didn't get to all your questions, if you want to ask them after the fact, you can put them in the comments, and we'll do our best to get to them. Oliver, if people want to know more about your work and resources and stuff for Willie Thomas and your writing and projects, how can they find out about that stuff?
I have a little website, olivergroenewald.com, GROENEWALD. Yeah, just feel free to contact me through this, or find jazzeveryone.com, and it's not, it's for free for a while. I mean, as long as you want. Actually, there is we have a section where you have a fair amount of insight, and I've organized a letter which will reach out to you where you get information, and maybe today you like to check this, or today you like to check this, and the Willie's philosophy about teaching, which I think is at least the same important than all the video and the material is his style. I mean, have you met him in person once? I've
never met him in person, but I think I remember hearing that Ryan Kaiser was one of his students.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm a huge Ryan Kaiser fan.
Justin Kaiser
them,
too. Yeah. You're right. That would worth another set of introduction.
We'll do another one. So, for everybody watching, thank you so much. Oliver, thank you for making the drive down. It's been a pleasure having you and put up with my questions today, and I'm sorry we don't have more time, but we're going to take a short break, do a little sound check here, and run through some new music that Oliver's written and that I've written, and we're going to start the performance live stream at 5 p.m. So if you want to come back and check us out at that time, great. If you can't make it, it'll be on our YouTube page later on, but thank you so much for your support. If you find value in these interviews and the concerts that we're doing, 90% of which are free and open to the public, feel free to make a donation via PayPal or Venmo or mailing a check, and all that information is at the beginning of this post. And thank you so much. We'll see you again. Enjoy the rest of your day.